Reshoring is work that's going offshore and you bring it back. Backshoring logically means just the same thing. The only difference is that re is a Latin root and back is an early English root. Okay, but they mean the same thing. Onshoring means making it here, whether it ever went away or not. So onshoring defines only where it's made, whereas reshoring means it went away and it came back and it's made here. Outsourcing is work done by another company. So General Motors could, in Michigan at a factory, could outsource to another company in Ohio. But if it's another company, that's outsourcing. If it had something made by a GM plant in Brazil, that would be not outsourcing but in-house. But if it was done in Brazil, it would be offshore. There's another popular concept called nearshoring, which would be Canada, Mexico, and Central America. So there's in addition to the reshoring trend, there's a trend towards nearshoring, where work might come back from further away to somewhere here to get most of the labor cost advantages, but a lot less logistical disadvantages. So offshoring is a major cause of the relatively slow economic growth of the last decade or two, the Great Recession that we just went through, the U.S. and state budget deficits that we read about every day in the newspaper. If those jobs hadn't been lost, there'd be so much more taxes paid and so much less stimulus, et cetera. We'd have much smaller deficits. Unemployment, weakened middle class. We read about income inequality, et cetera. And a lot of that hollowing out of the middle class is those are jobs that used to be manufacturing jobs. And used to be the way up from being relatively poor, immigrant, what have you, up towards being richer was to go through the factory. Declining innovation. There's increasingly evidence that when you separate engineering from manufacturing, that innovation declines. So the offshoring was significantly not an objective decision. Steve referred to making objective decisions. It was not an objective decision. It was significantly, but not always, herd behavior. Herd being like the lemmings, coming all up like this. And so each company would see other companies doing it. They'd see their competition doing it. They'd see factories being closed. They'd see the boom in China or in Brazil or Mexico. And they say, everybody else is doing it. We've got to do it. And sometimes the company would have a bad quarter, and the margins are down. The CEO would announce, we're going to offshore a third of the work to get our margins back up, et cetera, et cetera. And maybe they did, but perhaps the margin, the cost came down, the price came down, so the cost of goods sold came down, but the overhead probably went up, and they probably achieved the margin, but perhaps they didn't achieve the profitability. In fact, a study by Archstone Consulting back in 2009 showed that the majority of companies, 60% or more, applied only rudimentary or simple total cost models. They'd look just at price, or maybe at landed cost, price, duty, freight, packaging, something like that, and ignore 20% or more of the total cost. And that extra cost would go into overhead like travel cost or carrying cost of the inventory, or maybe not even appear at all in the P&L or the balance sheet, something like opportunity cost. If you can't deliver because you can't get quick enough response from your supply chain, you don't get the order. Now, not getting an order, there's no sales, there's no cost, there's no anything here in your P&L and balance sheet. It's all over here in your competitor's P&L and balance sheet, but that isn't recognized. So, and if you're making decisions on 10 and the real cost is 12 or 13, sometimes you make the wrong decision. So we're not saying all offshoring was a mistake. We're saying some of it was a mistake at the time, and even to the extent that it was correct at the time, now that the economics have changed, now that the Chinese have had so much success with their wages going up and the currency going up, et cetera, that even some things that made sense 10 years ago might not make sense today. So a study came out from Accenture, one of the largest consulting groups, and said that there's a trend towards gaining competitive advantage by getting closer to the customer, by producing things closer to where they're going to be consumed. And the reasons they gave for that were better service and lower inventories, agility, total cost. So again, this total cost concept as opposed to just price. An even more important study came out from Boston Consulting Group, very timely for our location, and they said that we should expect a renaissance in American manufacturing, with manufacturing returning to the U.S., and that they expected net labor cost in China and the U.S. to converge by about 2015. And so specifically what they said was that for the least expensive U.S. states like North and South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, where the wages are lower, non-unionized, et cetera, that that those costs would converge for product that would wind up in the U.S. So not that you could make it here and ship it to China and be competitive, but that you could make it here and be competitive with product coming in from China. So they did not say that labor rates would be the same, that they acknowledged the labor rates in China would still be significantly lower, but because the productivity on average is not as high and will not be as high, even though the productivity is going up faster in China than it is here, that the gap in the total labor content of a part, which maybe is this big now, maybe would come down to that much, and then all those extra total costs that I described, which many companies have ignored, those extra total costs would be enough to bring the total cost of the Chinese product into the United States higher than the U.S. by about 2015. Okay. And so our objective is to accelerate that process, or at least make sure it happens on schedule, to change that sourcing mindset from the typical, what most companies, what most Americans believe, that offshore is almost always cheaper, to local reduces, in most cases, or in many cases, the total cost of ownership. So those of you who are at the top of the food chain, we would train you on why you should source local. And for the guys, those of you who are here selling up to these, and where you have competitors from offshore shipping into the U.S., we would say, use these methodologies to help sell, help convince your customers. So in general, we encourage production near the customer. So we say the U.S. should be more or less self-sufficient and should have a neutral balance of trade, as opposed to a $600 billion a year balance of trade deficit. So, but we would say the same for Mexico, we'd say the same for China, we'd say the same for all the countries. We're not saying the U.S. should produce everything and dominate the world manufacturing. It'd be nice, but it's not going to happen. We say relatively neutral balance of trades. We have a regional initiative. We bring together big and small companies in Illinois to get them to reshore. There's a problem in the U.S., in many countries, but it's, I think, worse in the U.S. For a lack of skilled tradespeople, precision machinists, tool and die makers. Whatever your industry is. How many of you are having problems with skilled technicians and workers and that kind of thing? Okay? It's in machining, etc. It's a horrible problem, and it's understandable in that, in machining, say you've got $1 million machine, you want to hold really tight tolerances, you don't want anybody to wreck the machine, so the kid coming out of high school that's smart enough that you'd want to have them do that and trust them with that is also smart enough to read about post-industrial society and all the work going to China and offshoring and see all the places that have shut down, and therefore they're going to decide to become a businessman or a salesman or a lawyer or a doctor or something, but not a tool and die maker or precision machinist, because why do that and get laid off as soon as you get trained? So to the extent that industry can show that it's committed to bringing the work back, it tends to give that good player that we'd like to bring onto the team reason to be recruited. The U.S. dollar has generally been declining. Oil prices have been soaring. So all these things are shocks to the supply chain, and therefore it's becoming harder to make a good decision on where to go. This is what the typical company sourcing decision has looked like in the past. They'd say, well, here's the decision criteria: price, and alternative cost with alternative sources. Offshore is low, 30%, 40% lower in some cases, and locally is high. Typical decision: buy it offshore. That's that sort of herd mentality, non-objective decision, but very easy decision to make. And so figuratively, I'm the little Dutch boy here, and you're the village elders. And I'm in trouble if I'm there by myself, whereas if all of you come out and help repair the dike, then the village is saved. You know, and offshoring is pushed back, reshoring happens, and life is good. Okay?